We wanted to ask you also about the term modern Orthodox. What does it imply? The term has been very misunderstood, debated, maligned. Can you explain what the term means to you, and if it's an appropriate title?
The answer is it is a very correct title, but of course, like you said, it's a very malign title. Judaism always was, in my humble opinion, always was modern Orthodoxy. What does that mean? It means, well, let me go back to something else. There was a French historian, Fernand Braudel. Braudel wrote a book, and in part of his book, he discussed a concept he calls world time. So right now, in the world that we're living in the Christian calendar, is 2022. That's world time. That's a chronological time. All advanced societies are living in 2022. But in world time, there are some societies that are 100 years behind, 200 years behind, or 500 years behind. They're more primitive. I shouldn't say the word primitive, but they're pre-modern. They're not with us. So some people want to live today in modern chronological time, and that's world time. And some people want to live in the past. Let me give a stark example, Hasidim, or Hasidim as they call them, right? Hasidim don't want to live in modern times. They want to dress like they dress in Poland and Russia. They want to speak the language that they spoke in Russia. They consciously don't want to be modern. That's a decision. There are other people who say, I want to live in the world today, chronologically, and I believe the Torah is so strong and so great that it can function and thrive in contemporary time. I don't want to live in the past. So Orthodoxy in general is very past-oriented. When we have questions, we say, what does the poskim say from the previous generation? What does Rambam say? What does the Shulchan Aruch say? We look backwards. But the greatest poskim are living into contemporary time. They're not living in the past. They draw on the wisdom of the past, but they're trying to understand the present. You can't give a psak about modern economy without knowing modern economics. You can't make a psak about should Israel go to war or not go to war unless you know military strategy or diplomacy. You can't make judgments about how people should live their lives if you don't know what's really happening now. So modern Orthodoxy means that we try to take into consideration not only the vast bulk of halakha that we have in the past, but we try to see it in light of modern contemporary wisdom, which is exactly what all the rabbis of the greatest rabbis of all generations have done. The Rambam was also modern Orthodox in that sense. He tried to understand what is the best science we have today and give psak based on what he knew today. He didn't base himself on what was known 2,000 years ago. He based himself today. Let me give a strange example. Years ago, when I was president of the Rabbinical Council of America, we were discussing the issue of brain death and organ transplantation. So one of the rabbis, great Talmid Chacham, says he quoted a rabbi from the 1800s, from the 1700s, who says that the definition of death is if the heart stops beating, and he quoted some interpretation of a pasuk to show that the life is the beating of the heart. So I answered, sure, that's exactly what the rabbi in the 1800s said, and that's what he thought. Kol hakavod, nothing wrong with that. But that rabbi had no idea what a ventilator is. He had never idea there was such a thing as heart transplants. He didn't know what a modern hospital looks like. How in the world can you give a psak today on the basis of what some rabbi said 200 years ago or 300 years ago, who has no clue and couldn't have had any clue about what our situation is today? A modern Orthodox rabbi says, if you ask me a question on brain death, don't go look in the poskim from Rambam. Rambam's not going to answer that for you. Go to the hospital, speak to a neurologist, speak to expert medical experts. Modern Orthodoxy means being as up to date on all the knowledge that you have to give proper guidance on issues that confront people today. Rabbi Halevi, I mentioned it before, he was asked questions about Israel. At some point, they had a trade of they traded Palestinian prisoners for some dead soldiers, Israeli soldiers. And there was a big tumult about it, and Rabbi Goren came out, it was asur, the government had no right to make the trade, etc. Rabbi Halevi answered, without going into details what they should or shouldn't do, he said, the only ones capable of making a psak in that kind of case is someone who's aware of diplomacy, who's aware of the military applications, who knows all the reasons that go into making such a decision. If you're just sitting in your baby midrash, you don't know all the reasons. And therefore you really are not, even though you may be a great Talmid Chacham, you know Shas inside and out, you're not competent to judge in this case. And I think that would be my definition of modern orthodoxy. Modern orthodoxy, it has to be based on learning. It's not just a gimmick. It's not a giveaway. It's not a compromise position. It's fundamentally a real position. I think it's the correct position, the best position, namely, draw on the best of our Torah wisdom, but also the best of current wisdom, and come to decisions that make the most sense given the contemporary situation. What we decide today, 100 years from now, they may decide something different. That's fine. Each rabbi has to decide in their generation what's right.
Modern Orthodoxy fundamentally then rejects the concept of Gedolim in terms of view Gedolim in the Haredi sense of
a rabbi said this 200 years ago, and therefore
no, it doesn't have to be 200 years ago. It could be even today, and even if the rabbi is not necessarily knowledgeable in specific areas which would need be. However, the idea behind the Gedolim would be that the holiness of this rabbi, or the fact that this rabbi is crowned a gadol, whatever his psak is divinely ordained,
it's infallible,
or whatever it is. We don't go with it.
I strongly disagree with that idea. I strongly disagree with that idea. Let me go back to my days as president of the Rabbinical Council in the beginning of the 1990s. I arranged conferences around the country of Orthodox rabbis to deal with the question of intermarriage. What do? We don't like it. We wish people wouldn't intermarry, but it's happening. So to what extent do Orthodox rabbis have a responsibility? A couple comes, one's Jewish, one's not Jewish. Should we just throw them out the door? Should we talk to them? Should we try to convert? Should we try to break them up? What should we do? It's not a question that can be ignored. So we had the 5 conferences, and we were attacked bitterly by the right wing. Oh, it was a terrible time. So 2 Rosh Yeshiva from YU called me to the office. So I came to the office, and they said, "What right did you have to have these conferences?" I said, "I don't understand your question." He says, what Gedolim did you consult with before you had those conferences?" I said, "I didn't consult with any Gedolim. I have a brain of my own. We have committees of our own, and we're perfectly capable of making decisions. These are things we have to face. We're synagogue rabbis facing issues that you had no right to make that conference without first consulting a Gadol." I said, "Okay, let me come back to you. Would you please tell me the name of any Gadol who deals on a regular basis with people who want to convert to Judaism, who sits in the room with parents who are crying that their child is going out with a non-Jewish spouse, non-Jewish girl or non-Jewish boy? Tell me the names of who have practical experience dealing with these kind of cases." And then I'll go and ask the question. They said, "It's irrelevant. Gedolim know siyata d'shemaya. They know from God's." I said, "I don't believe that. I just can't. I don't know how you could believe that. I don't know how any intelligent person can believe that. They're just as fallible as we are." And the proof is, during the late 30s, 1930s and early 40s, the Jews in Europe had many Gedolim. They didn't tell the people to get out of Europe. They didn't tell the people to fight back. They didn't tell the people to join the Zionist movement. They didn't say go on Aliyah. They let their people die like crazy. So these were Gedolim that were supposed to be leading the people. They had the Tziyada Dishmaya. Where was it? There's so many different cases where so-called Gedolim, and who crowns them as Gedolim is another question. But there's so many different cases where they just simply, they might be good, they might be intelligent, they might know all of Shas and all of Kabbalah, but that doesn't mean that they can make decisions that, well, I want to choose for my life. I say without any apology that every Jew, whether rabbi or layman, has to think for him or herself. When you go to a doctor, the best doctors in the world, and they tell you you need to do A, B, and C, of course, you're a doctor, you take good advice, but you could also ask for a second opinion or a third opinion. You have to make the decision if you want this treatment or that treatment. Ultimately, you don't be blind. Don't just go in and say, well, whatever they tell me, I'm going to do. Often you go to a gadol or someone who knows a lot, and they do know a lot. Baruch Hashem, you draw on their wisdom, and I've consulted with many people who are much greater in Torah than I am, and I've learned much from them. And many times their ideas are excellent and they're helpful, but sometimes they're not. How could we expect a person who knows Shas in and out to be an expert on all medical technology, on the economic life, on political life, on relations between husband and wife, on how to deal with children who are turning away? How could one rabbi know all those things? can't. And it's a gimmick to think that the rabbi can. And I feel that that's one of the deterrents that turn many thinking people away from Orthodox Judaism. They think Orthodox Judaism is a closed book that you're not allowed to think. And I started my institute years ago, Institute for Jewish Ideas and Ideals, specifically to create the idea or to foster the idea that Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, is intellectually vibrant, compassionate, inclusive. We want you to think. We want you to grow at your level. We don't want to tell you do this and then you have to do it because I told you so. No, I'm giving you good advice, but take it as advice, process it, think about it, apply it to your own life.
Two things I want to add to that. Is that, it seems as if in the world of the Gedolim, the leadership is dynastic, whereas that was never the case from going into the tradition, going back to the Torah and the rabbis. But aside from that, I'm actually somebody who's very into, I study a lot about cults, and I notice, like, when I watch these documentaries, there's a common denominator that there's always a point where you have to shut off a part of your brain. And it's in every religion. It's in Judaism, it's in Islam, it's in Christianity. And I think that, what people tend to forget is that the Tselem Elohim, the intelligence, the divinely given intelligence that we all have is the one thing that separates us from the animal kingdom. So why should we ever turn that off? Why can't we think for ourselves? And people have this mentality sometimes where, like, no, you can't say that, or you can't think that. And like, I feel like that's something that it's very hard to fight against, that attitude, because like it's such a rampant belief among ultra-Orthodox people. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that or to say to that.
It's not just Ultra-Orthodox. Orthodoxy in general, even the so-called
Right.
Modern Orthodox, has shifted a lot to the right.
Yeah.
I was a rabbi of a Sheretz Israel in New York, the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. From 1969, I started as a student rabbi, and I was there for 38 years as a rabbi. When I was 60 years old, I decided already I was going to transfer out of the rabbinate, which I loved. I had a wonderful congregation, had a wonderful career. If I had to do it all over again, I would do it all over again. I couldn't have been happier. But I was feeling Orthodoxy was choking me. I was feeling that Orthodoxy was going in such a wrong direction. I couldn't stand it. So in the course of my life, I worked on all kinds of committees. I was president of the RCA, I told you. I can't tell you how many different organizations I was involved in, worked for. I felt, I'm getting choked. So I told the board, in 2 years' time, when I'm 62, that's going to transfer out, and I'm going to become emeritus. And they were very cooperative. It was very, very wonderful. Why did I leave? I told you, because I felt choked. And I founded the Institute for Jewish Ideas and Ideals. And I didn't even know we'd still be existing 15 years later. We still are. We publish a journal. We have teacher education programs. We have a university network, blah, 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 all kinds of things. And we have a website that gets thousands and thousands of visitors, jewishideas.org. But I knew then, and I still know, that we're not going to win for a long time to come. Orthodoxy in general is not on our side. Orthodoxy in general is becoming less thinking, not more thinking. And unfortunately, those who become more thinking tend to drift more to the left. Instead of trying to hold on to the center, there's one movement going more and more left, but the much more movement moving more and more right. And so-called, what used to be called modern Orthodoxy, is afraid to talk for itself, where there's a visceral fear. When you say the word Gedolim, you don't think of modern Orthodox, you don't think of Rabbi Sachs as a Gadol, Rabbi Lamb, or other people. They're rabbis. Gedolim are old-time rabbis with long beards and black hats. That's a Gadol. You don't think Daniel Sperber's a Gadol Hador, or with Rabbi Halivni, Alav Shalom, was a Gadol Hador. These were also tremendous Gedolim. They knew tons. But in a popular mind, they're rabbis, or they're scholars. The Gadol Hador had to be old rabbis with long beards and black hats. And those are the ones that are the Gedolim.
They have to be divorced from the world to a certain extent.
Correct.
That's part of the point.
Correct, exactly.
That is the whole point.
That's what my fight is against.
I know.
And Baruch Hashem, we have people, thousands of people, but who follow us. But the vast majority, it's an uphill fight. And my basic thought as a rabbi and as a Jew if you can't think for yourself, you're not going to be a good Jew. You've got to be able to think for yourself, process for yourself, take responsibility for your own life. And as you do that, you get the inner courage to really enjoy the Torah and Halacha. It's not them telling you, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that, and you're being afraid every time you're going to move the wrong way, you're going to get zapped by God for doing a sin. That's not the Judaism I'm talking about. I'm talking about Judaism that is very humane. God created us to be happy and fulfilled human beings. He didn't create us to be scared automatons. He didn't create us to turn off our brains. And I think the more we think and the more we read, the more we interact with the world, including the more we learn Torah, of course, the stronger we are as human beings.
Meant to enhance life. It's not meant to restrict life.
What does that mean? It infuses us. It gives our life. It gives us life. It's not just something for the holidays, something to put on the wall to hang up as a certificate. It's fulfilling. But you have to do it yourself. If you don't do it yourself, you don't have the joy.
Wow. Unbelievable. And I want to add, before we get to the last question, which is going to be short, but I just want to quote Rabbi Sachs again, because this is really related to what we were saying, and I love this quote. He said, "To my mind, the most serious issues confronting contemporary halacha is not lack of creativity, but the sociological divorce between the centers of Psak, nowadays largely the yeshivot, and the centers of congregational life. Psak involves applying Torah in its unchanging totality to Jewish life in its present specificity. A law interpreter, no less than a lawmaker, must have a clear objective understanding of the lives he is called on to instruct. Rabbi Yeshua once suggested that Rabban Gamliel's capacity to lead the Jewish community was compromised by his ignorance of the economic conditions in which they lived. The same surely would be true of a posek who was ignorant of their intellectual and cultural circumstances." So I want to end on another question relating to another phenomenon that's been going on in the last, let's say, a few hundred years, is the Kollel kind of lifestyle. Because while there is a lot of value to, someone like a Talmid Chacham honing his skills in a Kollel, I want to know what your thoughts are, considering the following quote that I'm going to mention. The Rambam says, "Anyone who believes in his heart that one occupy oneself with Torah and not work, but support oneself with charity, behold, this one desecrates the divine name, dishonors the Torah, extinguishes the light of faith, brings evil to oneself, and forfeits life in the world to come, because it is forbidden to benefit from the words of Torah in this world." So what do you make of this statement?
I love the Rambam. All the so-called Gedolim and the Kollel leaders, they all know the same Rambam, but they say that was for those times. But we live in emergency time, we need to have Kollels. So they dismiss poor Rambam, even though, of course, what Rambam says is very correct. But whenever they don't agree with the Rambam, they find a reason a way to get around him. Let me start with the following observation. People learning Torah, it's a good thing. People devoting their lives to understanding the Torah in a deeper way, kol hakavod. You can't argue with it. The question is, what's best for society as a whole, Jewish society as a whole, and what's good for the individual? So every individual is different. Let's forget Torah for a moment. There's some people who are physicists, and they spend their whole life in the physics lab, and they're supported by grants by the government. It's the Kollel. They're supported by charities, so to speak, by university donors, and they devote their life to physics. No one says that's a terrible thing. Why? Because maybe they're going to come up with some great discovery. Maybe they'll come up with some good. They'll influence students. They'll raise better, great physics students. No one says there's anything wrong with that. Likewise, if there's a group of people that are devoting themselves day and night to the advancement of Torah study, like in the Kollel, and they're being supported by the public, okay, the Rambam wouldn't like that as a way of life for everybody, but Rambam himself got income from his brother. His brother was a jeweler. I think Rambam himself depended, besides that he was a doctor, but before he was a doctor, I guess he got some financial help from his brother. It's not the end of the world. The problem isn't if there's a group of 50, 100, 200 people around the world who are devoting themselves morning, noon, and night to learning Torah, and these are elite, brilliant scholars from whom we can expect great contributions, great writings, great teachings. They'll establish yeshivot. You can't condemn that. The problem is when this becomes a way of life that involves hundreds, thousands of students of men who don't earn livings, and some of whom are quite learned and quite capable intellectually of learning all day, and others who are not, but they just go along for the ride because that's what's expected from them. And it's also very unfair to women who are thought you have to come from a rich father in order to get a good shidduch, because these guys aren't working for a living. So how are you going to pay? If you have 10 kids, who's going to pay for those kids? So you need to have some source of income. So women are stuck having kids and having to earn money and having to have a rich father or grandfather to help support. The whole system is very problematic in many, many ways. It's not up to me to judge how other people should live their lives. Let them all live the way they want. But it seems to me that at some point the system's going to break down. It's going to break down because it's on a fundamentally flawed basis. To have some expert physicists, great people in the lab learning all day, we all need that. Great medical researchers, that's fine. And great Talmudists, that's also fine. But to try to expand it to have thousands and thousands of people not working in a productive way and leading their lives in such a way that they have to live in poverty or live off charity is a disgrace to Torah. Did God give us a Torah so we should be beholden to other people for charity? See, Rambam writes very harshly, very strong, but ultimately it is a chilul Hashem. I'll go back to a question that Rabbi Halevi got from there was a yeshiva bocher in Israel, Bachur Yeshiva, wanted to get married, but neither he nor his bride-to-be have any money, and their parents don't have any money, but they want to get married. So he went to his Rosh Yeshiva, and Rosh Yeshiva says, here's a note, go around and schnorr and say you're getting married, you need money to get married. And the kid just feels very bad. I have to go begging people to get money to get married. Felt very bad. So he came to Rabbi Halevi, and Rabbi Halevi basically, the same spirit of this Rambam says, it's a shame in our day and age that yeshiva students are identified with poor people who have to go begging for money. And it disgraces the Torah. Everyone thinks, yeshiva bocher, you must be poor, you must be unproductive, you must be a parasite. So instead of making people feel Torah is wonderful and strong and valuable source of life, it's for parasites, it's for people that are losers. Mm-hmm. So he says that, so Rabbi made a suggestion, which of course no one liked. His suggestion was all the Rosh Yeshiva should get together, and they should, next to every yeshiva, there should be a factory, some sort. And all the Bachurei Yeshiva should learn, and they should spend 4 or 5 hours a day in the factory doing work, and they should get paid. And the pay should not be given to them. It should be put in escrow. So when they want to get married, they already have a bank account. They already have money in the bank account. It was very practical. But Rabbi Halevi was really tackling with this idea to have a whole generation of young men not being trained to hold jobs or be responsible in society is a disgrace to Torah. It's not an honor to Torah. It's a disgrace. It means Torah people can't function in the society. Torah people have to depend on the charity of others. This is not healthy. So yes, we need some Kollel type of people. And throughout the generations, from the beginning of time, before there was such a thing as Kollels, there always were people who were very learned and who were supported by their communities. And kol hakavod, that's fine. But when you have it such as a mass movement where people feel they must work in this system, that's a problem. I was once at a restaurant and the mashgiach comes to me, Rabbi, I have a big problem. What's your problem? My problem is I have a son who's 25, but he works. I said, what's the problem? He can't get a shidduch because he works. The girls only want someone who sits down and learns all day. Is this normal? Is this healthy? No. This is a sick society. It's an inversion of the way things are supposed to be. So I think God gave us Torah Chaim, Torah to live in this world, live properly, live religiously, but live as a human being. Don't live as a vegetable. Don't live as a robot. Don't live as on the side. Live a full whole life.
And to just end on this point, I just want to add that in Israel, we see the result of this mentality or this approach to Judaism as, like I think the majority of the poverty-stricken people in Israel are the Haredi community who adopts this lifestyle. And unfortunately, I think it comes from maybe magical thinking that like Torah in itself will sustain.
God will provide. God will provide.
God will provide. And I think there's a famous, just to end on this, there's a famous Agadah in the Talmud, which talks about, the famous one of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai when he goes into the cave with his son. I think people miss the overall message of that story, that he's railing against, kind of seeing the positive side of the material world and, the world of the roads that the Romans built. He only looked at the negative. And then even after he came out from the cave, he was actually punished. He was sent back into the cave. People see
got thrown back.
He got thrown back.
He wasn't able to see the world for
what it is, and he sees a person working the field and doesn't understand why they're not learning Torah. And then God sends him back. He punishes him. And they're really telling us that the point of it all is that the world, and so previous guests have mentioned this, that the author of the Torah is also the author of the world, and we have to remember that. We can't separate the two. They're one. So thank you so much for joining us. This was amazing.
So important. These segments are so important. We thank the rabbi so much for his time.
Thank you so much. And kol hakavod on your important work.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that.
We'll send you a copy of this soon.
That'll be terrific. Thank you so much.
All right.
Shalom, shalom. Be well.
You too.